what are the risks when governments start to think like startup companies? Are there risks, and is that bringing a revolution to the public administration and governance, or is that something which can help fueling the broader innovation agenda in society?
That's a very good question. I think the risks are when governments don't think like startup companies, but much more than when governments do think like startup companies. I think the example is probably better when it comes from an Estonian than from me. I'm an observer. And I heard this story firsthand from President Ilves when he said, in 1992, when Estonia became an independent state, he was a telecommunications minister, if I'm not wrong.
President Ilves was at that time ambassador to United States.
Okay, so I may have gotten the timeline a bit off. But anyhow, the point is that there was an offer from Finland to take hand-me-down telecom equipment. And he said the Estonian government politely refused, thanked, and said, either you give us the best or we'll find our own. We're not going to take hand-me-downs. And he was talking about how two things really worked, which is really people thinking like startups in the government. So I think there is something to be said about how Estonia did what it did.
But let's look to the other side. What are the risks related to that when you can imagine that there is a Minister of Social Affairs? Can they start thinking like startup? Well, they have a business to conduct day after day after day. They have departments, they have staff, civil servants, and they are very, very regulated.
Right.
Where is a space for innovation? And finally, none of the civil servants gets remunerated from being innovative, but rather performing what they did last year in the same way as they did this year.
That's true. And I think some of it, as part of the blame also should go to folks who measure how countries and cities do what they do. People like us, when we, pay special attention to the things that matter, then governments tend to make improvements on those specific measures. So there's something to be said about, it's people like us who build scorecards. We call it scorecard diplomacy. The reason is when we measure something and compare countries against each other, we're holding them to account. Take an example, the World Bank's doing business rankings. Countries really want to improve their scores on the doing business rankings. The reason is investors look at it. It has impact on FDI. It has impact on governments getting re-elected, and so on and so forth. So I think part of it is really also institutions and researchers who are out there measuring the right kind of things. When we do measure those kind of things, then they get improved. So the first step starts with measuring them. The second step, I think, is having forums of this kind where people are able to exchange ideas. And beyond this, I would probably say there have to be working groups where governments can get together beyond beyond the talk shops, if you will, and get into some kind of action working groups to really understand what they did, where they did, and where they can make marginal improvements over time.
I feel, in a sense, often that governments, when being accountable, they are accountable within their society, within their country.
Right.
Within the local media and to their electorate. They are not comfortable at all on putting them to the situation where they say that we don't know what to do. We want to do something, we want our best, but we exactly don't know what to do. We don't have capacity. We have a lot of countries here in this conference also present who are very small countries. Really, and if you are looking to the complexities and the needs for not only institutional but also for individual capacities, you are certainly not able to deliver all those competencies. In a sense, small countries are ideal models to move ahead with digital transformation because you can harness your society more inclusively. The big countries often expect and would like to be like a small countries. we have heard about our former CTO of Canada saying how difficult it is to manage projects which are $1 billion plus in size and are entirely focused on one deliverable area. It's so difficult to manage such a complexity. But what needs from the governments to recognize that they could kind of achieve their policy goals by cooperating on some very narrow fields? I recall from your presentation that you made in your smart society analysis also kind of gap analysis. And could we have a highlight from the poll of the
closing poll?
It was in poll.
The
yes.
final poll.
Yes, the final poll picture, which I think we can get to the screen.
Sure.
Before it gets to the screen, could you once again say the key principles of having those gaps? Why do you measure those gaps in particular areas? Is it because you can see the room and space for the improvement, or what are the other maybe incentives behind that?
I mean, the funny part is we as researchers found a gap in the way gaps are being measured. So we said, let's go measure these things because really we want to draw attention to these things that matter. And I may have, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned it during my talk, that there's a tremendous amount of overlap. About 2/3 of the indicators that we measure are also relevant, directly speak to the SDGs. So just working on, a model like the smart societies, and I'm not advocating for our own model here, but anything that, like the smart societies model, automatically gets you, pretty further along on some of the other goals, which all country governments have all signed up to. Speaking to your other point a little while ago about how big countries find it often these are giant ships and they take a while to move, but when they move, they decisively move. But that's the advantage that smaller countries have is that they are, like you said, able to harness and move quickly. The attention is not on them for the most part, which means that they're able to kind of stay off the radar and do things. The other thing that, one thing that I think governments could potentially learn from the world of startups and businesses is create small little tiger teams. Give them a tiny budget. Let them test, let them fail, let them learn in a way that, it's sandboxed, in a way that it does not, unless proven otherwise, does not impact everyday business. But if there's a great idea, give it some oxygen, give it some air cover, let it work. So I think there are enough good practices out there that can be learned and borrowed from.
There were some indicative areas, for example, for the digital transformation, which we had on the screen earlier, like narrow ones, which are, say, a micropayment architecture in one country, a national digital payment infrastructure, which I saw a number of people from the audience noted as a needed one, cybersecurity issues, which is also a concrete policy area which requires an implementation, which often you don't know really where to start, how to do. And traditional ways, government is procuring individual consultancy to have been advised with its own resources or with a donor help. However, it's kind of one-to-one consultancy. Accelerator concept is something else,
right,
which means that 3-5 different governments which have identified similar problem come together and jointly together find, together with a mentorship and coaching, the solution to the problems they have. Do you see that, and now we're talking not about startups as companies which are raising an angel investors' money and government should do the same way, but rather a process of getting from idea into reality together in a condensed accelerator process? Would that be something where you see at all governments willing to jump in and say, yes, I don't want individual consultancy, I would put my senior staff, my deputy minister, to work for 1 year together with another countries in cohort with a similar problem. Would that be viable?
It clearly is. So, Estonia is a founding member of one such network. This smart, enlightened, advanced governments are already doing that. The digital 5 nations that I talked about earlier in the day, which are now the digital 9, soon to be 10, is one such group. And so I had I was at the D9 summit in Jerusalem last year. And what they do is something fascinating. So they get these working groups on issues that most governments have not still thought about. So ethics of AI, for example. And there was a closed-door session on the ethics of AI. And 9 very smart governments sitting together and saying, all right, you know what? How do we think about these things? And these were chief privacy officers, chief information officers of governments getting together and saying, how do we look at this? What should we be considering? Are we somehow stuck between, the Chinese state and American technology? And is there anything in between? Is there a third voice? What is a viable framework for some of these, ethics? And how should we be treating these things? The kind of conversations that are absolutely necessary. So I think the smart governments are already doing that. That doesn't mean the rest should not. I think there is ample scope for a tiny group of countries to get together and say, let's leapfrog Estonia. Let's first get to where they are and figure out what they do. You're all here anyways to learn from the West. And then, there's nothing stopping. And I'd be, as a researcher, I'd be delighted to see a small group of countries getting together by their own volition saying, let's start a network.
So we are talking about micro-coalition in a sense, say,
Absolutely.
a dedicated cyber-security coalition of 5 countries who want to show we can achieve something with less investment in shorter time and to showcase that together we can solve the problem.
Absolutely.
What will be the topics? We had an explanation about narrow topics or broader topics. Broader topic can be also something like digital skills in society or the overall entrepreneurship in society, which are very broad topics, or the digital agenda, a broader coordination of the digital efforts. They seem to be a kind of a broad ones, yet there are very concrete and narrow ones. What do you see also as an analyst working behind the same smart societies? Where do you see the gaps, and can those gaps be translated into concrete working groups?
Absolutely. I think there's any amount of room and scope for this, right? So, for example, we measure the quality of transport as one of the 242 indicators that go into the giant framework. Now, there's nothing stopping a small group of countries that have, in some sense, similar transportation challenges, or to get together and say, all right, we want to move the needle on this. So it could be a temporary. You could even have, as a part of your charter, the goal as being, we will move the needle. We can dissolve the group if you want or continue. But the first step in the next 6, 8, 12, 14 months is to be able to move the needle from where we are to where we want to be, and get together and create that little, working group. I'd call those, targeted action groups. Learn from each other, and also have one expert at the table who you are benchmarking to. And I mean, the advantage that governments have that businesses don't. I mean, let's say I am let's say I'm Coca-Cola and I want to learn from Procter & Gamble. They're not going to let me in on their secrets. But governments are happy to share what they do. I mean,
are they really happy to share?
Oh, absolutely.
What are their problems? Are you willing to say to other country, deputy chancellor of your Ministry of Environment, that this is my problem? What is your problem? Can we find a jointly solution, kind of constructed way of finding a solution using digital technologies for the common problems we have?
Oh, absolutely, with the right kind of facilitators, right? So facilitators are important. I mean, so first off, you need to know who is in your peer group, which means some element of, knowing where you stand vis-a-vis others, and, what kind of benchmarks you want. is one approach. The second is to kind of look for the right kind of facilitators who can keep this group, because you all, I mean, governments, bureaucrats have jobs to do. They have they have stuff to do, which means that it's best to have some kind of a facilitation that brings you together, helps you move along, and helps you cross-pollinate best practices and knowledge.
We have also had questions from the audience. Please use app Workshop, and we will also open up the mic, of course, for the discussion and feedback from the audience. So be ready and raise your hand. Well, we have already one. First, I will go with a question.
Absolutely.
What is the role of and value of the hackathons for the governments? And this is something very interesting. I can start by contributing back. In Estonia, we have an startup NGO called Garage 48, which is organizing hackathons in various topics. The process is very simple. It's 48 hours. You start by, first of all, calling up the topic, the big problem, say, the food, or the cleaning the water, or air, or water purification, or you may get down to a very concrete business areas, like service economy improvement, and then you have a different source of competencies which are called up together, coders, architects of IT systems, but also lawyers who know about the regulatory framework, business development managers, and the end result will be a presentation of the mock of the working business model 48 hours later. And we need to admit that the biggest value of those hackathons has been actually a shift towards two areas. Changes in regulatory framework, because in so often regulators don't even know what is a problem when introducing new technologies. And second has been an openness, or really the readiness for the public administration and government structures to open up for the collaboration with those new ideas. So those two aspects have been really the value in using the hackathons also for the public administration and the government. However, the advice when doing it, the problem needs to be articulated very concretely and very well. It can't be, let's make life better, let's make everybody happy, hackathon type of thing. But really saying a problem, we have a chronic disease population increase in society, and we would like to have that addressed with new and novel business models or technological solutions, which includes also forms of non-making profit for the business. And those are also accepted ways. So those are the successful ones when harnessing the digital hackathons. But we had a hand raised. Can we have a mic over there? Yes, please.
Does it work?
Yes, very well.
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity and for the excellent panel. Actually, what I wanted to do is more kind of a suggestion and a desire. As you know, we are talking about accelerators of the digital transformation. Countries represented here are not equal. According to, for example, a Deloitte study, countries are divided into three groups of developing countries, undeveloped countries, and in early stages of the development. The challenges for each group are different, and the barriers for each group are different. Hence, the suggestions and the way forward for these groups are different. In order for the audience to benefit this maximum from what your excellencies are suggesting, I believe it's important to create this digital maturity framework for them to understand, first of all, where they are, what they need, and where they should start. I believe the overwhelming majority of the audience here, what they lack is a digital strategy, a digital transformation strategy upon which they should develop roadmaps and blueprints and look into the budgets and the resources they have, and they tackle it. Is it leadership, skilled workforce? Is it culture? or is it simply a question of management? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Such a splendid feedback.
That's great.
Can't agree more. There is, however, also another notion which we recognize every now and then. There are technological opportunities, modern digital technology opportunities out there, which can be used as a kind of, I would say, low-hanging fruits. We had a very interesting presentation also explaining how in Rwanda the blood distribution to the hospitals is organized by drones.
By drones.
And now it's a very important question. Did they start by deregulating airspace in the outside of the airfield territory? Or no, it was really an opportunity they grabbed, and the later value that was gained was followed later on by regulatory and institutional changes. And it was a very radical change in the process. And we have been witnessing very interesting cases in the countries which are emerging in terms of the development. However, it's a very good notion that digital strategies need to be in place. Where I am, where I want to be, and how to get there.
That's true.
When working with a smart societies analysis, do you see that digital strategies is also a missing link for many countries?
Absolutely, it is. I mean, and to your point, and very well made, sir. There's a reason why we started with the Digital Evolution Index. The first thing to understand is to know where countries are and how fast they're moving. What are the inputs that are going into the digital economy? You can break them down very easily. You know whether you have the right ingredients or not. If there's something missing, there's a gap right there. And then you start looking at outcomes, which was our smart societies work. And to your point, could you repeat your question once again?
Digital strategy. Is digital strategies one of those core missing links in the country's evolvement?
Well, digital strategies emerge and evolve out of the gaps that are. And the other thing with governments is they are constrained by, there are too many problems and only so much time and money and resources available. And where do you divert your attention? So what is a priority? What is not a priority? So what helps is to be able to first get an objective view of the landscape, so you know what your big gaps are, and then you may have your own set of rank ordering of those priorities. There are some priority areas to which technology may not be a solution. For example, we measure something called the current vitals of society. Now that's really, looking at how many young people are in a country, what is the dependency ratio, how many old people are in. No amount of technology can change transform old people into young workforce. That technology hasn't happened yet. So technology may not be the answer for that kind of a problem, but there are many other problems to which technology can be the catalyst for leapfrogging from where you are to where you want to go.
Now let's get to a very practical thing. By fall 2019, Estonian e-Governance Academy, together with the partners, will announce a digital transformation accelerator for governments program. Would you imagine that this will be by governments who would be interested and on what topics, or rather opposite, saying that we will have a splendid group of coaches and experts on a digital payment ecosystem, and governments who would be interested apply, indicate, and commit to that. So do you see that this process will be more beneficial if you say that this is a very concrete and tangible area, digital payments, cybersecurity, or a particular service or register digitalization? Or will it be a broader one that countries just in general indicate your general interest in digital accelerator? Concrete versus broad approach.
Well, I think at a broad level, for things like this, you need the buy-in at the highest level. So the heads of state, the prime ministers and the presidents have to bless it.
But we have had them on UN level on the...
Right.
There are so many global
Absolutely.
compacts and deals and agreements on our joint digital future, which unfortunately has not led us into tangible, practical solutions for the citizens.
Right. And to that, what I would say is the first thing to do is to get a buy-in to be a part of such an accelerator from heads of state. Once they do, that gives permission to people working for said heads of state to be a part of these issue areas. So I don't see it as an either or, I see it as a combination of the two. It's extremely important, these, especially when you're talking about government digital transformation, the buy-in has to happen at the top.
So buy-in on the top.
Buy-in at the top and empowerment at the lowest levels, where people can form teams, cross-country teams, intra-country teams, et cetera, to be able to help those. So the leader's job here, I think, is to be a part of it, sign up to it, get out of the way, and let the smart people in government take over and make that change a reality.
And final one for our panel session, because we will be followed very quickly with into another very splendid and interesting countries' presentations and discussion. What do you see? Should the countries in cohort collaborating around the same problems, should they be neighboring countries? Should they be just countries in one region? Or can you put together one country, say, from the Pacific Ocean, small country, another from the mainland Europe, another from continental Africa, one from Caribbean region? Is there a difference in terms of distance at all? Can the countries be very kind of distant from each other, or should they be neighbors in order to get the value from the accelerator type of program?
So positive neighborhood effects are rare, and I've seen...
You say rare.
Are rare. We've seen them work only in specific cases, the United States and Canada, the Scandinavian nations, the Nordic nations. As you go further down into the global south, those combinations tend to be rarer. Those collaborations tend to be rarer. I mean, we were in New Zealand recently, and we were looking at doing the next turn of the crank on smart societies. The New Zealand government is actually working with us in trying to find how much public value and economic value can be generated by closing specific gaps, their own gaps against the best of the best. We started looking at the right kind of benchmarks for it. Turns out their ideal benchmark is not their neighbor to their giant neighbor Australia, it is their antipodean cousin Ireland. New Zealand is most like Ireland from all the data that we've looked at. It was an eye-opener to the Kiwis as well. When we told them your ideal competitor, benchmark, peer, is your antipodean cousin. So just to kind of give you an example of, neighbors do not always need to. There's obviously a healthy competition among neighbors, as long as it's healthy, but I've not seen it be very healthy among many other countries, not to my knowledge.
Well, do we have a feedback from audience also? Happy to work with neighbors, please, the mic over there. Or do we see there is no difference between who you work as long as you're committed to solve the problem and you have also an authorized team really to deliver that? Please.
Thank you, gentlemen, for a very engaging and academically based discussion, but tempered with practical solutions you've both observed. If I could add that I too have seen in probably 15 years of consulting in developing countries, more than 40 countries, the kinds of problems that senior leadership are tackling have become more complex than they were earlier on. Now what we've seen is that even when we bring a small group of neighboring countries together, there's a lack of that mentor or leading country to which they can aspire. So there's a willingness to come together, but difficulty in then knowing who we're aiming for, who we want to become. I think in your earlier presentation, you mentioned becoming Estonia. This, for example, in the Pacific, in some of the East African countries, we see the same dynamic forming. And so the gap that I've observed in consulting with senior leadership is, how do we now take this very senior commitment and then translate that and break down that strategy into the tactical and operational things we need to do. So the accelerator idea sounds like a wonderful opportunity for these countries to then take that next step from senior political commitment to execute.
Thank you so much for the excellent feedback. And this is also a very valuable input. Ravi, our time is over. We can't thank enough our audience for listening and being patient with us. We look very much forward to make that idea of putting countries to collaborate around the similar problems of the digital transformation agenda jointly and together. And we look very much forward to have a similar coalition, micro-coalitions around those accelerators led by governments of like-minded goals. Thank you once again, and I would like to give over the floor to my good colleague, Hannes Astok, Director of E-Governance Academy, Estonia.
If I can steal from Mao, and why not, let 1,000 micro-coalitions bloom. All right, thank you.
Nii.